So one of the, I guess, um, things that religion is all about is faith. And the question I was really thinking about recently is faith the most important thing in life? Because people always say it's like, oh, no matter what, always keep faith, always have faith.
Yeah.
And it sort of gets you through choppy times and things like that. So as I was reflecting on that, I have a question for you. Would you wish for your kid to have faith but suffer a lot on earth, or have a great life on earth but not be part of any faith, more specifically your faith?
I don't know if I'm using the term right that it's a catch 22, but I think based on the fact that I have faith or that I'm living my life choosing to have faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
The obvious answer is that you would choose your child to have faith as well
Right.
and suffer on this earth, right? Because the reason, well, the only, it's not the only reason you have faith, but with what comes along with faith, that you believe in heaven, you believe in like God's eternal promise. And so to want your children to have a great life here only then to know that they're going to suffer or not have the eternal heaven that is promised at the end is kind of weird, right?
Mm-hmm.
To say the least. I think, and then if you even go further into that, right, there's this idea or notion that the closer you are to Christ on this earth, the more you share in the cross that he bore, right? So you look at, for example, the saints, right? Their stories are not glamorous, luxurious lives of just great triumph and like riches. It's literally like, oh yeah, this person was persecuted. This person was like who, I forget which saint it was that was put in like a Nazi cell and starved for like
Maximilian Kolbe.
Maximilian Kolbe. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Where it's like, yeah, that's insane. Like they wanted to kill him through starvation. They just left him in there,
Mm-hmm.
and he somehow made it out alive after all these years. Just
Oh, sorry. Maybe you're thinking about someone else. Kolbe was a guy that he offered himself up for someone
oh,
else.
that's it. Sorry, maybe
Yeah.
I'm just the story.
Yeah. Okay. So it looks like you are saying that faith almost provides rationale for suffering because all these people suffered on earth. It was like, sure, it was their lives, but it was temporary to some degree. And it was their existence on earth that had all the suffering. And then eventually, because their faith persisted, they were able to have the glory of heaven and the afterlife. Am
Yeah.
I
No,
summarizing your point?
that's fair. I would say so.
Okay. I guess, like you said, the catch 22 part of this
Mm-hmm.
is in order to persevere through all that suffering on earth, you have to believe in the first place, and
Mm-hmm.
more so believe in your proposition of like a Christian God,
Yeah, exactly.
right? I guess I'm trying to ask this question from the perspective of someone who is maybe struggling with their faith, or just they're in the midst of suffering or watching someone else suffer, which sometimes could be harder, and they're looking for any way out of, not in terms of suicide, but they're looking for an answer, a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And every time they keep trying faith as a solution, it just doesn't seem to fit. So, in that context, what would you tell someone like that? Keep trying even though it doesn't work and eventually it'll fit? Or.
I think it's very dependent on their outlook, right? What you described, um, I think the person's outlook is really important, right? Like, for example, like the first thing that comes to mind is, for clarity, when I say, right, the people closest to Christ are those who suffer the most. It's not for sadistic reasons, right? It's not like Jesus just loves to torture the people. Like, it's the idea is that because Jesus suffered for others in order to save them, you, through suffering, you learn a sense of, um, like, again, sacrificial love. You learn certain lessons that you don't learn if life just comes easy to you, right? Going into it's easier for, like, what is it? I a cow or something
a
enter through
camel to pass
camel through the
through.
needle. Yeah, exactly, through the hole of a needle.
So
Then yeah,
it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man
exactly,
to
to enter the
enter
kingdom of
heaven.
heaven. It's the
Yeah.
idea that if you are literally blessed with all those riches,
Mm-hmm.
you will not understand the suffering of a poor man. So you won't be very empathetic. Let's say again hypothetically. Um, so you maybe lack humility. You'll lack love and compassion and those things. You learn those things through suffering because when you go through those pains yourself,
Mm-hmm.
when you look to someone else who potentially might be going through something similar, you then will feel that pain again
Right.
and then want to reach out to them.
I agree with your point in the sense that pain and suffering also seem to be one of the most potent bonding agents between human beings, right? Because it's oftentimes, yeah, people. Oh, cool example. It's sort of like a football team celebrates once they win, like the cup or the trophy, but it's not the victory that they're celebrating. It's sort of the pain that they've gone through together in order to achieve that goal. So I almost see suffering in the sense of it allows people who may not have anything else in common with each other
Mm-hmm.
to actually bond. So what I'm trying to say with the team thing is they're not actually bonding on the fact that they won together. They're bonding over the fact that they suffered together.
That they made it through
Yeah,
the suffering together.
yeah. So I like that take on suffering, but I still there's something about again that double-edged sword of if you don't believe in the afterlife,
Mm-hmm.
then wouldn't you just pick the least amount of suffering while you're on earth? I'm not
Yeah, of course.
proposing for like the degree of hedonism, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like in that sense, like finding or searching for alternatives that maybe are not faith based or specifically Christianity based. So, what would those alternatives even look like?
So what would suffering look like if not
What
within a
would
Christian?
trying to avoid suffering look like if if not through faith?
I'm not understanding the question. So because through faith, what would avoiding suffering look like then? Like what did we discuss
So
right now that
the I guess the reward of faith is that even though you have suffering on
yeah.
earth, you're going to have eternal life.
So it's not so much avoiding the suffering, it's the what is the reason for enduring the suffering in faith is the reward at the end.
Yes,
But
yes, yes.
outside of faith, what benefit would you gain from enduring suffering if not that eternal reward?
Yeah,
Or
I
that
guess.
well, I think the lesson itself applies regardless of whether there is a reward or not, right? And I think even though I kind of said initially that the reward is why you endure the suffering, I think the lesson is more important. Maybe I should have put more focus on that. The closer you are to Christ, the more you are put through suffering so that you may learn what it is like to love the way God loves, right? Everything in life, I believe, is about learning and growing, right? Self-improvement. So take away the fact that, yes, you are trying to improve yourself in order to go to heaven. Again, still the goal would to be reunited. Take that away. At the end of the day, it's so much, you learn so much from suffering, period. So I think to answer your question, you are just growing as a human being, as an individual, if you go through pains. I don't know. I think it's just very, um, you just see that very often in like every part of your life, right? Like working out, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Working out is not sunshine and rainbows. It's pain and it's sweat and tears, and sometimes it's days where you just don't want to go through it, but then you do it anyways because in the end you grow stronger at the end of it all.
Okay. Let I I think to this point I haven't asked the right angle of this question, so I'm going to try again and let's see
Sure.
where we get to because I'm almost trying to ask what would you trade for having a better, happier life on earth? For example, like in this scenario where sure, if you're suffering on earth, you have I guess a higher probability of celebrating in eternal life, right? And this is all assuming a soul is real, assuming afterlife is real, all that stuff. Because all these things we don't know, we just choose to believe them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, so it's almost if you already struggle with believing that the afterlife even exists, what would you be willing to trade to have a happier life while you're here? Like if
So
at the
basically, if I'm a person without faith,
mm-hmm.
what would my outlook be? Or what should my outlook be if I am going through suffering and I want to.
And all you want to do is have a happier and successful life. Like how do you push through that layer if you don't have faith or don't have faith in this Christian God? Because I just had a thought. One of the older sort of concepts that's always lingered since ancient history is like Stoicism, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like even though you have everything good or your life is fine and comfortable, you are always mentally preparing for the worst. And by staying in that zone of discomfort, at least mentally, and maybe sometimes even it translates to your life. For example, you brought up working out. Is that person who doesn't have to do it, but they'll wake up early in the morning and like do a workout or, fast on
Mm-hmm.
purpose just to abstain from food or like pretend what it would be like if they didn't have the luxuries that they do have. So there is some foundation in just general philosophy as well
Mm-hmm.
for just preparing for the worst. But apart from that, what is bad about that kind of lifestyle, right? Like, because at some point, Christianity says you need to have faith, but does that lifestyle even have faith? And if it's not, then what is it lacking, really? This thought of the afterlife or like eternal reward.
What is Stoicism lacking? I'm
Or
sorry. And
any kind of secular philosophy. Like, why is faith so integral?
I don't.
Or is
I
it?
don't. Yeah, I was. I don't.
Oh, sorry, that should have been my first question.
Yeah.
Is faith even integral to a human life?
It's funny. I have two answers in my head. I can hear the one answer that goes, like the very Christian answer is like, of course it is, because as a human, you strive for more, you strive for meaning and purpose, and without God, there is no purpose. So you will find that even if you accomplish and achieve your goals, you will be left empty until God fills your heart. Like that's the very like, and and so it's like, okay, no, I of course I believe that. So it's like I would say yes, but when I say I believe that, I don't know how to describe it. It's essentially saying I believe that God fills you and gives you purpose. But I do think, especially in today's world, it's very easy to go through life and just find a lot of purposes to fill any kind of hole. And even this notion like God will be the only thing that can fill that hole in your heart. Maybe you find a really loving family that fills 95%.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe at that point 100%. Like you just, subjectively feel like it 100%. I'm happy. I'm content. Everything is good. I can't deny that that's possible and that's real. So when I am answering your question, I do think there is a world where if you find a loving, supporting community and you are doing, let's say, a job that you enjoy, you have found a purpose in just, let's say, being a good father or family member, etc. You volunteer, you can replace this so-called missing hole. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but
No,
I
no. So
just
I think all I want you to do is say what you're thinking, because no matter what, I'm gonna start poking holes in it. So,
Sure, go ahead.
and then vice versa, right? So I think the point you made about finding a family or finding a purpose as a father, one of the things that I have seen so far through my experience is no matter who or what we find around us,
Mm-hmm.
there's always something that's even worse, or like something could happen that could throw it off course, or you could lose a person, or someone could betray you, or there's
Yeah.
all of these things, or you could just be um you could just take those relationships for granted, and like over time those people fade away, or like your purpose fades away because you lose sense of who you're supposed to be. So I'm almost zooming into those avenues where, at least in my experience, it feels like sometimes human beings are not enough.
Like
Like
we're not enough to fill each other's holes.
you almost feel the need to believe in
Mm-hmm.
something beyond human beings, just because we know that human beings are limited. Yes, one person is limited and a group of people are
Mm-hmm.
better than one person because you fill each other's gaps. But if you look at humanity as one entity,
Yeah.
there's still something lacking. There's still a flaw. Do you agree or disagree with that?
No, I agree. I agree. Again, so when I was answering your question, right, the side that I said that I believe in, as far as the Christian approach, the response that goes, God can only really fill, the missing parts of your heart, or giving you that purpose that you
Mm-hmm.
so desire. It's because, to your point, humans are flawed, right? So, everyone's been through that relationship where they were so madly in love and the other person just fell short, and maybe fell short time and time again because you were putting so much of your belief in them to be that person that will complete you, or be there for you, love you the way you're hoping to be loved, and then they fell short. And so I think for many who have gone through that experience, you then learn to alter the way you love, right? Maybe not put your full heart in it, or you do, but there is some form of a guard that gets put up. um, Basically, humans adapt. The idea that God will provide this love, that you will no longer need to safeguard anything or be afraid that he'll disappoint you, is where, like, again, God will like be there or not fail, and
Mm-hmm.
then humans will.
Yeah. Okay. So I like the fact that you considered like this broader range of things.
Yeah.
But now I guess, are are we creating a fake entity or a fake story that doesn't exist? In math, it's kind of like the imaginary number I, like the square root of -1,
Mm-hmm.
where it helps us solve all these problems. It, sorry, what's the word? So like the square root of -1 helps us solve all these theoretical problems,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't see it in real life. But those theoretical problems can be applied to real life to some degree.
Okay.
So is God that imaginary number?
I think you should chime in on this one. What do you like when you're in?
That's fair. I like that you flipped it on me.
Well, it's because you also know this. Like, this is, you would know more
Yeah,
about the
yeah,
application of this.
yeah. I think it also ties in, as we sort of always bring up Pascal's wager,
Yeah.
like live your life as though God exists. And to me, I think there is a significant difference between pretending that someone exists versus them actually existing. And because people usually say, oh, because the effects of this imaginary thing are felt because people are behaving as though this imaginary thing exists, therefore it exists, versus the imaginary thing actually existing. I think those are worlds apart. Because in one case, is people having a mass hallucination,
Mm-hmm.
versus in the other case, we're actually praising slash adoring or dedicating our lives to God. Right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
in both cases you behave the same way, but the end result is also starkly different. Because once you die, if God is truly imaginary, lights out, nothing else matters.
Yeah.
But if God is real and cares about you and provided you this purpose,
Yeah.
that's a whole other ball
Yeah.
game waiting
Exactly.
for you, right? So, and I think given that you know that the results are vastly different,
Yeah.
your effort to each of those in each of those cases would also be vastly different. For example, if you pretended that God is imaginary,
Mm-hmm.
you would be more willing to give up way earlier.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Versus if you know that just behind that curtain someone is waiting for you, you'll be willing to rip through the curtain.
Like, or just wait, sit there as long as you
Yeah,
need to until
yeah.
someone behind the curtain comes back
Right.
out to
Bad
retrieve
analogy,
you.
but you got the point.
No, no,
Where it's
exactly,
like it all
exactly.
depends on the true existing of God instead of pretending. Which is why, for me, it always goes back to the search for objective truth and how each of us don't have the tools to actually determine what is objectively true by ourselves or sometimes on a whole. And if only it goes back to faith for me, because if only we could
Mm-hmm.
witness God,
Yeah.
then we know he is true, and then therefore we wouldn't need faith. And it sort of brings me back full circle with why does faith have to exist?
Why does fate? So sorry, recap that dilemma for me, because I've in my head, to be honest, while we were talking, I was thinking like, you're asking me about suffering. This is interesting, but I actually was watching like a video where there was, again, it was like a podcast or something, and then one person was like, to be honest, like, this tangent doesn't really interest me as much because I'm losing a bit of like, what's the point of this part of the conversation?
Yeah.
What's the real meat and potatoes? What are you really trying to get at? And so
Yeah.
I guess my question to you is like, okay, suffering is interesting, and I see we're trying to scratch the surface of something, but I'm not seeing like, what is the bigger dilemma that we're trying to answer here? What's the question that, in my opinion, is like gnawing at everyone's, like, you were kind of getting at it. You're saying like,
Yeah.
humans, how did they deal with the suffering, especially if they don't have faith to answer their questions, right? To answer their cause for suffering. How do you deal with that? But I feel like there's something deeper there, a deeper question, or a question along those lines that I want to explore, but I'm not sure what it is. It's
Okay,
like,
so
do you
let's.
know what I'm saying? Like, do you?
No, I completely see the direction you're going in. I'm just trying to hone in on what exactly that is. So,
Yeah.
just to reiterate and summarize what you said, um, so people
Yeah.
who lack a faith in a spiritual being or a
Mhm.
Christian God or any kind of superpower, um, what is their solace in suffering? Is that right? Like, what is the purpose of the suffering, or how can they live through these painful situations and just accept it for like, oh, I guess I'm in pain, or
Yeah.
or this discomfort or this anxiety or whatever that may
Or I
be.
guess my question to you is like, what made you want to talk about this? Like, is there something that caused you to want to have this question, like, line of questioning?
For me, whenever I think about faith, I get extremely frustrated
Yeah.
because I guess when you look at it from a Christian perspective, people call them gifts like trust and faith, and maybe trust isn't one of them, but
Like
you
faith
get
being
it.
a gift. Like
Faith
faith
being a
is,
gift,
yeah.
where I'm not saying, oh, here you are, a gift, and like you magically have faith, but
Yeah.
different people have different propensities for these virtues,
Okay.
and I severely lack
In faith.
in the gift of faith,
Of course.
right? And I'm just trying to figure out why faith is important, or kind of like rationalize this in a system, because I'm trying to build a
Yeah.
system where faith need not exist, therefore I don't have any weaknesses, or at least in this arena,
Okay.
and then I'm good. Like, the faith
Yeah.
is the problem, not me.
Yeah.
If faith never existed,
If faith
I
is
wouldn't
not
be lacking
necessary, yeah,
anything.
then I
Yeah.
wouldn't be lacking as a human.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair. No, that's funny you say that because it opens up my thoughts to this. I think in the past we've always talked about how again, people are so different, right? Like it's like something to acknowledge is like, you know, you have like left brain, right brain, right? You have liberal, conservative, right? There's like a spectrum. There's spectrums essentially that put people are always on a spectrum from one side to another, and you can take the same that one person, sorry, and plot them like one side left, one side right, one side left, one side right, and then do that with every single person, and it'll be amazing to see just how they, I guess, hopscotch from left to right on different opinions and different viewpoints. You think that maybe all people who think this way on one topic will think left or right on this on everything else, and you'll be able to map out their thinking. And I'm sure you'll find people who are similar, but you'll also find people who are opposites, right? Um, so something that does bother me as well, which I share with you, is when I've always thought about faith and like when I've challenged my own faith, right? Or our faith. It always bothered me when I've met people who, similar to yourself, lack that, let's say, ability to have faith or trust in something that, you know, doesn't exist, or they don't know if it exists, or they just lack something about the way they think. And lack is the wrong word. They just differ in the way they think. That makes it harder for them to believe in like a religion or in a god, like follow the rules. Like, and so I've always struggled to find an answer to that question, because for me, when, again, in Christianity or in anything, they teach you that everybody has the ability to find God and God's love, right? But then you always go to the question of like, oh, what about that person who's born into a different religion and doesn't get exposed to it? And then someone will say, oh, God will reveal themselves to that person and give them the opportunity. But then you go, yeah, but some people are a lot more hard-headed, right? Or they're just very skeptical. So then does God put more effort to convince the skeptic, right? What is the God's plan in this situation to make sure the skeptic has an equal opportunity? Sorry, it's funny. I just equal opportunity to believe as someone like myself who was, let's say, born into the faith, right? Even though I had my own journey, and for a long time I wasn't even, I questioned it myself. But the point being, you know, I clearly have a lot more advantages as a person, right? If you look at the, just like, if God didn't exist, you just say like the world, this is the world, right? The world is just dealt with, like, people are dealt unfair hands. You just got to deal with it. But then if you believe in a God, how do you reconcile this idea that, well, it's an unfair world, like sucks to suck? Like, no, it, like, I thought God cares about everyone, wants to give everyone an opportunity. So to that point, I share with you this idea of like what happens there. I think, and please, if you want to chime in, you can. I just, yeah. Oh yeah, chime in first. Oh, well, I guess to close off what I'm trying to come into terms with, first, I just wanted to share the fact that I do share in that kind of concern, that thought. I think if I try to recall, because I really haven't thought about this in a while, what my response to that was, it's that there's a bit of a cop out. I think it goes back to this idea that people like to simplify through religion, right? How God will operate in order to, let's say, choose, or not choose, or like judge who and who will not enter the kingdom of heaven. I think I'm more open to this idea that maybe the judgment isn't as clear cut as we think, and the choosing or the selecting process isn't as clear cut, where there has to be some form of like, it's, again, it almost seems just very logical to assume, and this is obviously not within like what we're taught anymore, but it's almost logical to assume that if, for example, someone who's given a lot of opportunities to believe and then chooses not to believe, or chooses to believe, gets in, maybe there's even like a higher bar to which they need to achieve in order to, make the cut,
Mm-hmm.
versus someone who has not been given the opportunity to know God as much, maybe is just inching and playing with the idea, but was never for sure certain, lived a good life, the bar may be for them being lower,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's even this notion I've heard before where it's like right at the deathbed, God reveals himself in that moment, and then you get that choice. Like at that moment, that's your choice. Like, and so it's not even that you needed to have known and made the choice before death. It's that even at the point of death, when it's no longer, to your point, a faith question, but just a choice now. Sorry, because initially, right, faith is um based off the fact that you don't know if God exists. It's a question mark. It's a massive question mark looming over everyone's head, right? And that's by design, which we can go into later, but we've already had that conversation. But
Yeah.
for the purpose of the podcast, I can
Sure.
explain that. But the point being that once you die, it no longer becomes a question of whether his existence is real or not, but now just a choice of whether you want to be part of God's kingdom or not,
Okay.
which is not a bad thing, because that's the idea, right? At the end of the day, this whole life is a quote unquote choice of whether you want to be part of his kingdom or not. So if, let's say, you die and are given that choice and you choose God, then that's still, like,
Yeah.
again, no one knows.
I think that's interesting because obviously I'll preface my response by saying we're not theologians or whatever. It's just
Yeah, of
cool.
course not.
It's just cool to sort of like run these thought experiments and simulations to
Yeah.
see what makes sense or where we end up. And I want to sort of run through like your whole thing because there are a lot of great points sort of brought up. First, a subjective scale to judge people. Like
Mm-hmm.
it troubles me to some degree because I like an objective measurement of like this is the pass fail line
Mm-hmm.
and you gotta get over it. But what you raise is almost like a Gaussian mathematical distribution of like you adjust everyone's grades to
Mm-hmm.
sort of like see. So I struggle with that too because if God created all these souls and put them on the earth to be like, okay, I'm going to try to bring them back to me, and the devil's going to try to take them away. It almost feels, and I didn't know I was going to say this, but it almost feels like it's unfair to the devil to move the line around, because it's like, okay, God created the
Oh, man.
devil. Sorry, God created Lucifer, who then chose to turn away and then became the devil,
Yeah, sure.
right? So now, if you put all these people and these souls on the earth,
Mm-hmm.
and the devil's trying to like win for his team,
Mm-hmm.
and God's like, "Oh, you almost got this one, but you know what? I just changed the rules." Like, and this goes back to, I guess, God's justice or his fairness.
Mm-hmm.
Is God willing to let us, or I guess God can always grant you grace, and then it's your job to accept it, whatever. But is God willing to let you suffer for justice to the devil? Like, it's such a mess up. Like, again, when I opened my mouth, I didn't know it was going to go down
Sorry,
this
is
path.
God willing to let you suffer for justice of the devil?
So
To
in
make it
order,
fair to the devil?
in order for the devil to have justice in this game for souls,
Sure, yeah.
um, like there would have to be an agreement of like the devil's like, okay, if this soul is this bad,
Yeah.
then this soul's coming to hell no matter what. But I guess where both of these things align is where for each person that level is different. For each soul
Mm-hmm.
is different because God's like, okay, you know what? This soul never got to go to church. It was surrounded by like a really bad situation.
Sure.
So we can draw this line much lower
Yeah.
in my favor. But this other guy was born into like a family of priests,
Yeah.
and like his brother was a priest.
Yeah.
So he has to cross a higher threshold
Yeah.
in order to pass. Okay, that makes sense. Which also sort of ties into the parable of the talents in the
Yeah.
Bible.
Yeah.
It's really cool. So just in case like anyone listening doesn't know, it's almost like there's a story where the master gives out talents to his servants. So one of them
Essentially
gets
coins.
5,
Yeah. Okay.
one of them gets 10, the other one gets 50. So the guy with 5 goes out and like invests it
Mm-hmm.
and comes back to the master with 10. Let's just double.
Yeah.
And then the guy who got 10 comes back to the master with 20. But the guy who got 50 comes back and gives back 50 to the master. And the master's like, what the hell? Like, you're supposed to use these talents and,
Yeah.
like, invest them and make them bigger. And because of that, that servant pretty much gets banished or whatever happens at the end of the story. So it almost feels like, even though we're not theologically sound, the ideas make sense as a whole. And now I want to get to.
Sorry, give me 1 second.
No worries.
I want to. Okay, sorry. You were saying about the talents.
Sorry?
You were saying about the talents. You were continuing.
Yeah. So just to again, parable of the talents. So the guy who was given the 50 did nothing with them, and therefore he goes to hell.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So far everything sort of lines up, makes sense. But the part where you sort of lost me is when you zoomed in to the point of death, and I had an issue with, okay, so up until the point of death and before you die,
Mm-hmm.
you still need to have faith because you don't know if God is real. You don't know if God is true.
Yeah.
But then you said after you die, you see God, I guess I'm assuming. You're
Mhm.
given a choice whether you want to enter heaven.
I don't know where I honestly heard it from, but I just recall because there is so much up in the air, right? There is a lot of questions about what happens after death, right? What happened? Like, how does God? How's Judgment Day work? I swear I heard. I don't know if it was just in conversation with like other friends or if it was with a priest or someone of theological background. I thought it was proposed as an idea that it's possible or there's a potential to say you have a choice. And there's actually the reason why that one sits really well with me is because to kind of give again more context to how I see or how in my mind I've come to terms with like why I even choose faith um and religion and Catholicism in general is because I guess I've learned to see these like beliefs in a more
Malleable.
malleable, I want to say pragmatic way.
Okay, that's different. Pragmatic, sure.
Um, so I really like this idea that choice is a really big part of what decides whether we go to heaven or hell or not. Choice specifically meaning choosing to believe in God and choosing to again like accept Jesus and all that, etc. Versus not. And the way it works for me is, or the way I see it, or how I've heard it in the past, is that consider hell as a place where God's love does not exist. Right? You look at the devil. Devil goes, "I don't like you. I don't want to be part of your kingdom." Right?
Yeah.
So he goes to a place outside of that kingdom, right? And so that means you have to go outside of a place where God did not create, or where God does not roam or realm. Like it's not his realm. So if God is love and everything within his realm feels and knows God's love, he needs to leave that area and be in that part of not the world, but like in that realm or that area. So outside of, let's say, the fence. Now, if you look at humans, right, and as a Catholic believes, we desire that love. We desire love, just period, right? We desire love, connection, companionship, friendship. We desire community, right? That's where the true happiness comes, right? Like money doesn't solve your problems. Family and like love solves your problems. And when you look at somebody who lacks or has been hurt, they go through immense pain, right? So instead of the original way of looking at faith, where you say hell is a place of punishment and Jesus or God judges you on Judgment Day and he judges whether you're good enough or not. I think there's some portion of that still does, of course, exist. You can't just like be the worst person possible, but say, I choose God. Like that kind of, again, that goes to the whole like the bars, like God holds you up to a certain bar of standard. But the idea, though, still exists that you are actually, through your actions and your choice, you're basically being asked to choose whether you want to live with God or without him, right? So it's a lot more on you as a person and what you want, and not so much just what God chooses for you based off like your actions. When you look at, so I'm trying to find the best way to explain this. It's like I'm very much a big believer in this idea that God and this God is not this person in the clouds who just is there to like torment you. I do like,
So
especially,
maybe torment is not the right word, like judge you and punish you.
okay, sure,
Because
yeah, yeah,
tormenting comes from the devil, right? So
yeah, sure,
it's like he's not this entity that judges you harshly,
of
just
course,
looking for you to slip up
yeah,
and then
exactly.
throw you away.
No, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I'm just trying to escape this old way of thinking and going into this new way of thinking where, especially when every day you're being asked to have this relationship with God, right? When you're being asked to have a relationship with God, that means that God, and then you're even being told God loves you, right? He will take care of you. He will watch over you. You kind of ask yourself then, why would then God just be about like judging, right? And not wanting, for example, every single person, like almost like you're saying, why isn't God then just breaking the scales or breaking the
Tipping,
requirements, tipping the
tipping the
scale?
scales.
Sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right, tipping the scales and breaking the requirements that you are need in order to get there, just to help everyone get to heaven, right? And it comes down to something that you always hear, which is love is a choice, right? And when you're in marriage, you actually learn that the feeling goes away and you actually have to choose love. You have to choose that person every day, right? I think that's such a key important lesson that like someone needs to learn, that like you can really apply to this. So for example, God wants your love, but he cannot just take it. You need to give it. So you are given an opportunity, right? Like, and this is now I'm throwing into this hypothetical, right? We're put on this earth unknowingly aware of whether God fully exists or not. Because knowing God's existence would actually tip the scales, right? If you knew God existed for sure, you would have no choice but to love him. Because if he existed, like to your point, right? You know God exists and you know there's a heaven. If you choose to not go there, like if you're just like, no, I don't believe in God, then you've already made the choice yourself, right? Now, unknowingly though, you get to live your life. You're given an opportunity then to really discover God's love and be not sure of it. Choose God's love and then go to heaven. Or at the end, be like, no, actually, I don't really want this. And then go to quote unquote hell, which isn't, again, a place of punishment, except it's just a place that doesn't have God's love. And so now you're like, sorry, I don't want to
Oh,
ramble
no,
too
no,
much,
no,
but I
no, no.
think
It's
I
good.
think I get it. Kind of circles back. It kind of makes sense. I think I can
So
say more on it, but
I've
I don't
been
want to keep
itching to
going.
jump in, but I wanted you
Yeah.
to find the ending of like what your point was, and I think
Yeah,
you did.
sorry. It was a very
So
loaded, like, it's
now
hard to explain everything.
let me fire back,
Yeah.
because as soon as you made the claim that going into heaven is your choice, I
Sure.
was already up in arms. I'm like, that makes no sense. Like, what the heck is the point of living a
Yeah.
faithful life in the first place? If at the end of the day all you need is a choice after you die,
Of course.
then why would I spend my entire life choosing faith and like making all these sacrifices while all I have to do is live however I want to, not go to
Mm-hmm.
church, not believe in
Sure.
God, not do whatever, and then once I die, because everyone gets the same treatment, be like, oh yes, I'll take heaven, please, like I'll have
Yeah.
the steak medium rare,
Yeah.
thank
No,
you,
of course. Like
you
a
know.
restaurant. Yeah.
But then I think this sort of makes sense, and I think even people who are not religious can sort of relate to this of the feeling of messing up
Mm-hmm.
and then not being able to forgive yourself. So let's just say you lived your life without faith
Mm-hmm.
and you did all these bad things, not feeling sorry for them or whatever, because either you didn't know they were bad or you knew and like you did them anyways. So let's just say you now are dead and you're in front of the gates and you're given the choice. But I think part and parcel of the choice is understanding the fact that the things you did were truly bad,
Mm-hmm.
objectively speaking,
Yep.
bad, and you are likely to get this overwhelming sense of, I don't deserve heaven. Because the person who's lived their life with faith, they've gone to confession, they've gone to, they've tried to like at least create a reason for like, oh, at least I tried. At least I, got better at these things or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the person who was oblivious to it and just made the mistakes, now they have to face the toll of everything right at the end.
That, and there's, sorry, just to clarify, there still is a sense of there's not sense, there is still judgment that occurs, right? Like, that's, sorry, not to, I think I said it a little bit. There is still, in what I was saying, judgment that does occur,
Okay.
because like I said, it can't be like, oh, I'm shooting people up and then at the end I choose God and all of a sudden I'm
But see,
forgiven.
I think that's part of the other, because part of the Christian teaching
Yeah.
is that the only unforgivable sin
Mm-hmm.
is not accepting the Holy Spirit. And in this case, Holy Spirit is translated to God's grace and like
Yeah, of
his
course.
forgiveness.
Yeah.
So I think that claim states that even if you shot up a bunch of people,
Mm-hmm.
if you truly are remorseful and accept God's grace,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yes. No.
that's your
Exactly.
way in.
Yes. No. That's
But I
fair.
think we don't fully understand the magnitude of pain that you would feel by
Oh yeah. Yeah.
accepting that, right? Because, for example, if I said something horrible to you
Mm-hmm.
and then an hour later I just say sorry, that's a much smaller bridge to cross than maybe cheating on your spouse, because that's a
Yeah.
severe violation of someone's trust,
Yeah, and the
right?
Catholic Church actually says that when you do die, you, before actually entering heaven, right? Basically, the idea is like, if you were to actually be exposed to God's true love and compassion, to which your point, you would be completely, you just, like, you would go up in, not even tears, you would literally like implode
Mm-hmm.
from the fact that you would feel the amount of shame and pain that you betrayed or failed and whatever, and then
Mm-hmm.
you couldn't look God in the eye. Like, so you actually, through before entering heaven, if you are, basically, if that is your destination, you have to go through the purifying fires, as it's
Yes.
called, where it's like absolute pain. It's like searing pain. It's almost essentially like what you would see as hell as, is like absolute pain, but it's because you're being purified of all those like scars and marks of imperfection that would basically destroy you inside if you
Mm-hmm.
were to see God like that without him still.
And just to build on that point,
Mm-hmm.
actually, I think if the merits of living a life of faith is that if you do this over the course of your life, the habit almost builds and becomes easier for you to do it at the point of judgment in front of God. Like when you're given that choice, because now that I see is the choice isn't, do you want to go to heaven or do you want to go to hell? The choice becomes, do you want to do the work required, or do you want to leave the baggage that you're holding on to
Mm-hmm.
in order to enter heaven? And weirdly, I think there are souls, or maybe even myself, who be like so attached to the baggage
Mm-hmm.
that you can't separate yourself from it, and therefore you'd rather fall plummet down instead of let it go. And that's really what I'm trying to get to. Like in this scenario, if you're standing in front of God, you not only see like how flawed you are, but you also see how much you're loved, like in His purest form.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it goes back to your question about connection. That, like, if we are built and driven towards connection, you would be, you're pretty much designed to let go of everything and then choose love. So then why wouldn't everyone like do the work in order to get to heaven? If that drive is so uh it overrides everything, or does it? Maybe love isn't the thing that overrides everything. Because if you're twisted enough during your time on earth and you don't see connection and love as something that you deserve, then would it even matter if God is in front of you? Maybe you still feel like you don't deserve it. And then you choose not to enter heaven.
I think that's a really interesting thing you just said. What if someone didn't feel like they choose? They deserve it, so they choose not to. I think. Um, sorry, it's in attempts to try and explain like what I was like my a big part of how I see faith, right, and trying to sum it down into like quick summaries. It's hard, and you feel like you can hear where you're like missing out on this, or like for example, like there's this whole like just to backtrack a second, like I'm hearing a contradiction, and I was like, oh, you'll get to see God, but then I'm like, oh, but you could never really fully see God because then you'll implode, so you have to go through these like purifying. It's like, so wait, what do you see God but you don't see God? So like there's like little things like that where I'm like, okay, like how do you explain that? Where it's quick, you could just be like, you're exposed to 5% of what God, like, truly is. Or maybe you even are exposed to, like, let's say an angel. Like, the idea is like you say you meet Peter at the gates and like
Yeah.
you, so it's like you have a choice at that point. But
So, sorry,
sorry.
I will interject one little
Mm-hmm.
thing here because there was a claim made by I think Saint Augustine
Yeah.
where he's like, if God literally came down to earth in front of you,
Yeah.
uh, it doesn't like 100% of people still might not believe just because you're like, oh, maybe this is scientific technological trick or something.
Yeah,
Like you're
yeah, of
always
course.
looking for a reason. So let's just say God's general ambiance on earth is at a 1%.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you die, and before you enter heaven, you're exposed to like 50%.
Sure.
Maybe that 50% is still isn't enough. And once again, none of this is real or theological. I'm just playing like a
Yeah.
thought experiment. Like how much would be enough for us to like tip the scales and want to enter? Because I think you can always rationalize uh destruction,
Yeah, of
your
course.
own destruction.
I think I agree with that. I agree with it. You can always rationalize destruction. I think more so though, it's human nature to start. It's like almost like putting a drug analogy in. Like it's the high is only very short, and then it's almost like you always have to be reminded. So it's very human. Like humans are very forgetful, right? We're very we can be like one day like, oh man, my girlfriend's the most beautiful person. She's the sweetest. And then the next day she does something that pisses you off, and it's like you just forgot like literally everything in that moment. You forgot that you loved her the night before. You just are like now pissed. Like you're just like, maybe she isn't the one, right? You just forget everything you had said before. So it's the same thing where you're saying like, okay, God could be in front of you, and you could even have a life changing experience with like faith, and then a year later you're like starting to question like, oh well, maybe it really wasn't, or you forget even the impact that it had, and now you're kind of back to your old ways. Sorry, that was a bit of a
No, no,
tangent.
no. So it is a tangent, firstly,
Yeah,
and I think we just encountered like another fresh idea for another topic. But
yeah.
I just want to finish that thought. Sorry, just recollecting what you said here, because one of the fallacies in that statement is that once you die,
Mm-hmm.
time ceases to exist.
Yes.
So there's no one day, there's no 50 years,
Yeah.
right? So we're not bounded by this, like maybe our um, marginal diminishing returns over time
Mm-hmm.
that no longer exists in this fantasy
Yeah.
heaven thing. But I do think we should table this for like another discussion. Again, not from like an angle of being theological, just from like the fun of it.
Sure. No,
I
for
like
sure,
sort
for
of
sure.
just,
I think yeah, we have to go back to your
yeah,
point
go
though,
back to where we left off. I
because
forgot.
the question was about a person who chooses not to like they're not worthy. So they're
Yeah.
like, I'm out. I think the thing with that though is if you really are put yourself in front of a place where God's love is so overwhelming, it can break through any kind of human walls that you've built for yourself. And I when I say, for example, it's your choice whether you want God's love or not, I think that because I know what you mean. I know people who are like I've met people who are just like nah, like I'm not good enough, right? But then and this is just anecdotal at this point. Like, this is my experience, right? I've seen them at, let's say, like a retreat. I've seen them at a retreat, not a hypothetical retreat. I've seen them at a retreat and go through, adoration, and then just sink to the ground crying. And that is, quote unquote, 0.1 or 0.00001%, right, of what we expect God's love to be, right? So if they, in that moment, just being in the presence of God, right,
God
on
on
earth,
earth.
God
Yeah.
on earth, like, and it's, again, not even, we don't know if it's real, right? Break down in tears. It's almost like,
What chance do you have?
yeah, what chance do you have? Exactly, right? And then if you say, oh, if you're that person, let's say right now listening, going, oh, I've never broken down in that thing. It's like, okay, like, maybe we just have to up the volume a bit, right? Like, it's like, you just, like, take it to the next level. Like, let's see. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's something so intimate and profound about this. I don't know, this idea of, like, when you really feel like, or or that, like, God loves you.
Yeah. I
I
think
don't think anyone says no to that. Like, I don't know.
as you were speaking, the thing that stood out to me is what you're trying to communicate is the immensity of
Yeah.
that love. Because I sometimes get the same feeling when I watch the show Cosmos, the one hosted by Neil deGrasse, where he has this like
Mm-hmm.
calendar of the year, and the time that human beings have been on the planet is like the last day, the last few hours, whatever. So, and just watching that show made me feel so small in the best way.
Yeah. Oh no.
Like, because
Yeah.
when you live day to day and you literally think your problems are the biggest problems because that's all
Yeah.
you faced.
Yeah.
But then you see nature, and it just contextualizes everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if the afterlife is real, the part that might be the most interesting to me is the timelessness of it. Again, like going back to the whole
If
idea of
heaven is
faith.
real, the timelessness of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. Going back to, again, I struggle to believe it, but if it is real, the thing I most look forward to is understanding what timelessness feels like, what forever feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Because forever is like the concept of infinity. It's not quote unquote real.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a real number, but it's a concept.
Yeah. So now putting that basically in practice, and then being like, it becomes real. It's funny because I'm actually the opposite. I used to be so scared of that. Like, it's almost like, again, the brain can't even actually comprehend what forever is like, right? At first you're like, oh yeah, live forever, it sounds awesome. But then you think about 100,000 years, and then you're like, only a million bajillion trillion whatever to go. You're like, and then it starts getting a little scary and daunting, just how long it can be.
Well,
Again, time doesn't exist. I understand that. So I'm not, it's not going to be perceived the way I'm explaining it now.
Yeah.
But just trying to
I want to interject on one
is
more
terrifying.
thing, though, because you're like, oh, only 1 trillion bajillion to go. The crazy thing about infinity or forever is 1 plus infinity is infinity, and 10,000 plus infinity is still infinity.
Yeah.
And 1,000,000 plus infinity is still infinity.
Yeah.
Like, there's no more, like, you can't count, or you can't be like, only X hours to go. Like, there's no more X hours to go. It's just infinity hours to go. Like, and I guess applying that to the concept of love, I don't know, random thought. Is there an upper limit on love? Just like there's no upper limit on time in this. Again, should you choose to believe it? Because I still think, just to me as a thought experiment, because every time I'm like, oh, this is real, I'm like, come on, be serious about this. But let's just stay in this world for now.
Mm-hmm.
And if time doesn't have any bounds, and love doesn't have any bounds, I guess the part I struggle with here is, the yin and yang factor. The fact that the love doesn't have the pain in this heaven, but I guess the love doesn't have the offsetting pain because the pain is relegated to hell.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still there in its infinite negativeness.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
I'm just trying to make sense of this theory that we just came up with.
Oh, the love being
Yeah.
heaven or love being God.
Or love being infinite. Like how like like when you go home and like your mom gives you a hug or something.
Yeah.
Like you feel that it's like, oh, this is pleasurable, it's nice.
Yeah, of
You
course.
know, it's I was longing for it and now I got it. But
Yeah.
now it's like, what does that to infinity feel like?
Yeah, I think it was a priest who said how did he describe it? He actually said cuz he was asked to describe what heaven would feel like. And he essentially described like a feeling of bliss, but I forget the exact experience he portrayed. Because in his mind, though, not his, like in his theory, it was he threw out this idea that it's not like you're living and you just like get to play sports and like just every day's a vacation. It was more like you basically become like it's like you are in the present, like you're saying, in the presence of love, literally just feeling it, and then it's like the butterflies and that sense of just that sense of bliss, and you're kind of you don't even it's like he said you don't even need to be moving. You're not going to be you won't need to move. You won't need to do anything, right? You don't need, let's say, to play basketball to get that hit of dopamine to feel good. It's just like you feel good, like the ultimate high, just consistent forever, which used to bother me though, because I was like, why would you just want to be like this in heaven, like for eternity? You know what I mean? For eternity, that's kind of like I get it, because if you really are experiencing that bliss, why would you need to do anything, right? But
Well,
then I've also heard the idea like you'll experience colors you've never seen before and sounds you've never heard and tastes you've never tasted. So it's almost like that would sound to me that's like
so
cool, right? Like,
again, like as you're speaking, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. I'm like, wait a minute. This is making it sounds more and more like a childhood fairy tale than like something that could be real. And
of course. Well, wait,
I
sorry.
no. So again, I struggle with this because I'm like,
Yeah.
at what point are we just making up stories, and at what point, like, because there's no experiment for validation. Like that's the
No,
thing.
there isn't.
Yeah, I know, right? So
Yeah.
I'm like, yes. I'm like, the more and more I get excited, I'm like, the other voice of mine is like, yo, chill. This is not real. you know?
Yeah. No, I hear you. I think the color thing though came from if you go on YouTube, there's like stories of kids who or even adults who died and then they came back.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they come back, they speak of like seeing heaven and God, and then
Yeah.
they go, "Yeah, I've seen." And then
Go
I
ahead,
think
B.
no, it's Lara using your washroom, but it still has to come through here.
Oh,
So basically, washrooms
okay.
period.
Well, unless my parents, because I think that's a separate.
Mm, either way, then yeah,
Okay.
it's that.
Okay.
Although I know Lara left, so I'm assuming she used the washroom. She'll be back. Sorry. Uh, another technical difficulty.
Yeah.
What was I saying? Sorry. Yeah. So I was saying, um, oh yeah. So you have these kids who essentially they come back to life from, you know, unfortunately being dead for let's say point or 2.4 seconds, right? Like, is it clinically dead or medically?
Clinically.
Clinically, right?
Yeah.
So they come back and then they're saying how they literally have seen colors that they've never seen before, right? They can't even express. And then they come back with this like amazing talent to paint. I think there's like this like I swear there's more than one child, but one girl comes out in particular where she's known for just doing amazing, beautiful portraits. And like just imagery. And so yeah, the claim from her is that like yeah, she's just like she can't even do justice to what she's seen, but she's just so inspired, so that she just continues to paint these beautiful paintings.
Okay, let's bring in my skepticalness into this scenario,
Sure.
because I try to look at the same stories
Mm-hmm.
from like a logical or a science based perspective, and it's all like I completely acknowledge my confirmation bias, where because I'm going into this and asking myself why could this not
Mm-hmm.
be a real spiritual experience. So I'm just going to tell you, I guess, some facts that I saw here.
Sure.
Um, One, I pose this against like historical quote unquote demonic positions that happened, where those were probably some kind of weird mental illness that was not diagnosable in the past. I'm not claiming that there aren't any demonic positions, but there's probably a higher likelihood that historical demonic positions were probably some percentage mental illness. And it's just
Oh,
not.
so sorry. Just to clarity, you're saying clarify. Sorry, you're saying historic like stories of demon possession
Yes,
were actually
like
just mental illness.
there's
Yeah.
some.
Okay.
I'm not claiming all of them were not
Yeah. Of
real, but
course.
some of them at
Yeah.
least,
Sure.
right? So taking this like heavenly near death experience or partial death
Yeah.
experience into account, there are actual studies where the brain actually releases certain chemicals and hormones that simulate drugs like DMT, or like taking mushrooms or
Yeah. Yeah.
ayahuasca or
Yeah.
whatever.
The brain
And
fires on like crazy
yeah,
cylinders when
so
you're about to pass away.
those external chemicals create these same feelings
Mm-hmm.
as internal chemicals. And the other part of this is like, how can it be truly validated apart from just asking one person
Mm-hmm.
or whatever people? So, how much of that experience, I'm not claiming it wasn't real, but what was the cause of it? Was it an actual chemical thing that happened in their mind instead of their soul truly going to heaven and then coming back?
I think, to be honest, like you're right that we can't answer that question, and I don't like really care to
Mm,
or to even hypothesize because
yeah,
regardless of what we say, it's just totally random guesses
yeah.
anyways. I think the better question here is how like how much should that skepticism have to play into your decision on whether you want to have a faith or even choose God or believe in God or
Mm,
not, right? Because you can use that same story as an argument um, for God, be like, oh, look at these kids with these like, recollections of things, right? And then you can use the explanation you just gave, which again is very possible, to be like, nope, it's just brain activity, it's not a big deal. At the end of the day, you still have a choice put in front of you, right? Going back to the choice thing,
mm.
bringing that back, um, whether which one to believe, right? If I choose to believe that it's just brain chemicals firing, it doesn't really change my like stance on.
The existence of heaven.
Yeah, exactly, because you could still be, once you pass away, still experience heaven, for example, and in some way, I don't know if this is a little sad, but there is some form of comfort that you kind of gain from this belief that if you do pass and there is no heaven, at least your brain will fire some kind of last,
Like a
almost like this,
confirmation.
yeah, this hot, like this confirmation, highlight reel of your life. I don't know what
Yeah,
would
yeah,
play
yeah.
out, but something that kind of closes your story to an end. Um, but yeah, I think, yeah, I guess the question is like, should it matter? Should it matter which one?
Mm. Um, Again, it goes to me. I always had an issue with Pascal's wager to some degree, and like reel me in if I'm going off topic,
Sure.
but it's almost like, oh, just live your life as if God exists and there's no cost to it either way. And I think there is a cost to it to some degree,
Of course there is.
because
Yeah.
you have to go to church or like you have to do certain things, and I'm like, So stop claiming. It's almost like the basic principles of economics. There's no free lunch.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if you're personally getting it for free, someone paid for it. But then I guess the Catholics probably justify it because, quote unquote, Jesus paid for it. Like, someone paid for it. So there's no free lunch, but I guess we're benefiting from a positive externality of Jesus Christ's sacrifice. So therefore, someone
Mm-hmm.
did pay the cost. So I don't know. To me, it's like as soon as I bring faith up, I can talk circles around myself. Where I'll make a point for this side, I'll make a point for
Yeah.
that side, and it just never ends. And I'm just like,
I
why?
think. Sorry. Um, something came up in my head where you were saying Pascal's wager, and I was thinking, how does that go in line with like my your choice? You choose God or not.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's even worth exploring, but because if Pascal's wager is stating that you live your life as if God existed in order to, you know, basically play the odds. Technically, if you apply what I was proposing, which is this idea that you're choosing, do you have to play the odds still?
I think you still have to play the odds because of the point I made earlier. If you choose to believe God doesn't exist
Yeah.
and it does end up true, you're gonna have a harder time overcoming all the negative stuff because it's just gonna hit you way harder. You're gonna feel less
Mhm.
deserving. Whereas if you've built this habit of like living a life of faith, it's gonna be easier to continue. Right? Does that make sense?
No, that does make sense. But sorry, I was going on a different trail of thinking as well, where it's also I kind of again I said this earlier. Um, you don't just make a choice with your words. Choice is also done through action, right? It's like you can, for example, be like, I choose not to kill you, and then I take a knife and stab you. Like it's like I said it, but I didn't mean it, right? So you can also say that you can also argue that choosing to do God, but then your life showcasing that you didn't really choose to choose God
Mm-hmm.
means that you didn't really at the end of the day. Like again, going back to even what we said going further back, that judgment and the bar being set is dependent on the person and their circumstances, right? You could look at somebody who didn't have the opportunity to know, quote unquote Jesus, wasn't born into the faith, etc., made bad decisions, but then, or not, sorry, didn't make bad decisions, but chose a good life, like lived a good life, but never really knew God, and then on their deathbed has that opportunity to be like, do you accept God? And it's like, well, it makes sense because they chose to live a good life. They just never had the opportunity to know,
Mm-hmm.
right, or be exposed to the faith.
Yeah.
Versus someone like again, where the bar is higher for you because you were born into the faith, but then knowing God didn't mean much to you because at the end of the day, you still chose to, steal or kill or whatever. And then at the end, you're like, no, no, but I believe in Jesus. It's like, well, did you? Because your actions don't seem to prove that you did. So I think the choice is twofold. And again, the bar. That's why I feel like the bar kind of it matters here. Like you have to also look at like
Yeah.
again,
We
it's like your overall
are.
profile.
Yeah, we're in agreement. We both prescribe to the bar idea because it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I have another question for you. I'm not sure because I think literally that whole thing was riffed off of one question. So
Yeah.
now I want to see if this builds on it
Sure.
or if it takes us in another
Yeah. Of
direction
course.
because they're both related to faith in some way. So, if you or someone you love has a terminal illness, but you lose your faith in that sort of situation, right? Suffering, whatever. Um, then you turn to an alternative spiritual practice or spiritual course, coach, sorry, a spiritual alternative spiritual coach that helps you manage that anxiety and the depression of dying. Which is worse? Like choosing to stick with your faith, but then you're riddled with this anxiety and depression while you're on earth, but then you have this Christian eternal life when you pass, or you sort of deviate and maybe you do like other kind of spiritual practices that are not explicitly Christian. And then I guess the latter part of like, would heaven still accept you? You sort of talked about choice, but I'm always curious about people who are driven to explore other faiths. Like, one, I find it interesting when people of other faiths join our faith,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I'm like, oh, like, what was so horribly wrong with your life that you chose to sort of enter the?
Yeah.
Because it's a huge decision. Like, the both of us didn't bother choosing a different faith. We're just like, oh yeah, we got this. It seems good enough. Let's just keep going. Like, I'm always curious about what makes someone choose that switch, like both into Christianity and out of Christianity. Because, so just to follow up on that thought, it almost feels like when people go out of Christianity, like the church or the people in the church rather look down on them to some degree. It's like, oh, you gave up, or oh, why did you abandon us, or why didn't you keep the faith? But then the people joining us are abandoning something else.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, what is this? Some kind of equilibrium where there has to be an in and out, or is there something that drives someone?
No, sorry, that was really funny. It's like, oh, sorry, we're capped out. Oh, sorry, someone just left actually. So
Yeah,
you can
yeah,
come
yeah.
in
You
now.
got we got a spot in the back view.
So your question is like you. So you're basically. I agree. It's very interesting that. Again, it goes back to the thing. People are different. What is it like? Like it's. I don't. Again, maybe this is not an answer your question, but again, it's my brain is already thinking of like people I've met who. You talk to them and you ask them. Actually, no. Sorry, I'll give an example. So I was watching a Candace Owen. I don't really watch Candace Owen, but for whatever reason, there was this podcast they were talking about Catholicism. So I was like, oh, interesting. And I guess her husband is Catholic. Um, I think I'm pretty sure he's Catholic, and so I think she converted, and so they were having a conversation about Catholicism and like his understanding of the theology and the history. It just puts us to shame, 100%. Like, and granted, you probably
Well, it depends on what your standard is. I don't have much of a high standard for myself, so I'm like, good for you, dude. Like, I'm glad someone
I'm
has
just
that
saying.
standard.
I'm
But
just saying. He did his homework
sure, sure.
basically, and
Sorry,
um
just to interject on that one. It's always funny. It's like, yes, I'm not bashing anyone who has a strong theological foundation,
yeah.
but because I do this to myself. I'm like, oh yes, I like to introspect and whatever, but at the end of the day, does that knowledge or that introspection benefit your life
Mm-hmm.
in some way? Again, tangent, but continue your point. Like, that's always a thought I have of like anyone
Oh
who claims
yeah.
like, oh, I'm introspective, or oh, I know all these things. So, like, what are you doing with that?
Wait, so those are
Right?
two separate things though. Introspection versus
Knowledge.
knowledge. Yeah.
I think introspection to some degree is knowledge of yourself.
Yes, but I
Yeah.
mean, as in like, sorry, just to going off of what I was saying. I was describing like the husband who theological background
Yeah.
versus he could have a very strong theological background but not be very introspective. So
Okay.
I mean, like they're very different
So,
though.
like, I'm saying, even if you have a lot of theological background,
Yeah.
what is the actual benefit of that?
So going into again, so the perfect question. Like people are looking for answers, right? Like at least if we were to say do people all share in common? The Catholic Church says we all share in common that we're looking for purpose, we're searching for love, we're searching for community. Again, we're searching for belonging, right? But we all are looking for that in different ways, right? So, for example, having a strong background in theology is only because in order for someone, let's say, to want to trust their beliefs or choose, sorry, like, you know what I'm saying, like they're trusting themselves into a religion, they have to basically like read the contract.
Yeah,
Like
so
it's
it's
like,
like, in
let me
order to like put my money into this bank, I need to do due
exactly
diligence to
exactly
like check their investments.
yeah
And I'm like, okay, I can put $10,000 in your bank because you know what you're doing.
Exactly. So
Okay.
then that person will read every like detail and go through every like section, double check, because they want to see if it makes sense, right? They want to see where the hypocrisies lie or where the secret little dirty, hidden.
Yeah, the hidden
Yeah,
clauses
exactly,
is
right?
like, you now owe me your soul for life.
Yeah.
One of those.
And so before they sign, before they actually commit, because they're very just thorough that way, and that's why when they choose that faith, they're like, oh, it's because it's very sound, whatever, or they just find so much. I get, because I remember when he was speaking about it, I don't think he was romanticizing what he had learned, but um, he definitely spoke of it and being like it's so elegant in the way things operate. Um, the point though, sorry, this again going off, is that is the reason why that person chooses theology. Like that's why they choose their faith is based off that, right? Versus you have the person going back to the bank analogy who's just like, oh, they're just very trustworthy. I just really, it's true though, right? Like that bank is just like
rated #1
yeah,
in the world.
yeah, like maybe that could be like you go, like applying this analogy, because I do find analogies are always the best way to like make it just much more consumable for anyone to like just understand and connect to. It's like, oh, it's 5 billion other people give it a 5-star rating or have like are with this bank, so if it's good for them, it's good for me, and they're doing what I need, so good exchange of services, done deal, like let's go. Then you have people who, let's say, they going into the whole relationship emotional thing, it's like you go, a bank is not the best analogy, but let's say the guy, the teller at the front desk is just really, he really cares, like you just saw so much care in how he took care of your money that
It's
you're
like when he said, "I hope you have a good day," you really believed he
yeah,
meant it.
yeah,
Like, I really hope
yeah.
you have a good day.
It's like you really felt that in here. Basically the point again, it's a really bad analogy, I guess,
So
but
in this case, you're
yeah,
saying the teller is kind of like the people in the church or the priest, is it?
yeah, but that's the thing. So that is that
Okay.
is the direct like analogy, but I'm trying to find a reason to, like, for example, God's love, like the emotional connection.
Mm.
Not that, let's say, for example, if you're theologically sound, you're not going to emotionally connect to your faith. I think
Yeah.
at the end of the day, everyone still does to some extent, but I do think emotion is not enough for one, or as much as it might be for another, right?
Yes, yes, yes. It's your propensity and your need
Yeah.
for logical explanations versus like feeling the presence of God.
Mhm. Yes, exactly. So I'm trying to bring it back because I always like we go on this
I
tangent
know.
and like it's
Well,
really
it's a
funny
fun tangent.
because yeah, it's sorry to keep going on this tangent. It's just it's so interesting, and I'm trying to find a way to like narrow it down, but I feel like I don't want to go too far away from the point that you were trying to make or the
Yeah,
questions you were trying to
I
pose.
think go back to Owen's husband,
Mm-hmm.
who was theologically sound. So, what stood out to you about him? Like, why did you
Oh,
bring
it
him
was
up?
just I brought him up because sorry, what I find interesting is how we are so different, but then we align ourselves. Like, so for example, as Catholics, like I will now align myself with this person,
Mm-hmm.
even though the way he sees the faith and the way I see the faith are very different. We
Mm-hmm.
may share some similarities as far as practicing and some thoughts that we agree with, but he'll look and explain the faith a lot differently than I will, which is what to me is interesting, right? That he found beauty in something that I found beauty in, but for different reasons. It's almost like looking at a painting and then I'm seeing this like section of it and he's seeing this section of it. And we're both seeing the same, or like he's looking at the technical, like the strokes are so profound and so intentional. While I'm just saying like, oh, it's an elephant. It's so cool. I love elephants, right?
Yeah.
Like there's just so many reasons to like something
Yeah.
and it doesn't take, I think like it is wrong though to take away from anyone's reason for liking something, because at the end of the day, that's what is like things are designed to do, is to grab your attention or to pull you in and try to address as many people and the way they see things the best you can. Like,
Mhm.
and so now basically what I'm trying to say is being theological is not better or less than versus like being just emotionally connected, or just even for the simplest reasons of liking something. Like basically the person who goes, "Oh, everyone likes it, I like it too." Like, yeah,
Mhm.
maybe it's not. Actually, no, that's not a very
No,
fair
no, no, no.
statement.
So let me.
That's actually not a fair.
I
I
think. I
can't.
think.
I
I
can't say
think.
that. Yeah,
No, no,
that's
no. I
not good.
think we were closer to something.
Yeah.
Um, I think that a person who likes things from a theological lens, because I have listened to a lot of theological people as well, even
Yeah.
though it's not the most important thing to me. The key thing is if you're passionate about it,
Mm-hmm.
like, and you can fake passion,
Sure.
right? At least to some degree, you can fake passion. Um, I will listen to you because I want to see like what is this thing that's driving you. And I do the same thing for people who talk about their own faith or whatever secular ideas. I think what is that aspect that's sort of like driving you to share this or like share it from this particular perspective, because just to compare your two sides, theological biblical ideas versus creating a song like a praise and worship song,
Mm-hmm.
is praising the same thing, it's knowing the same thing from either a logical academic perspective or like a very open-ended
Emotional, connected.
abstract,
Yeah.
like just a creative
Mm-hmm.
uh perception of the same faith. And weirdly, this is the part that kind of scares me to some degree. The deeper you go into the weeds on the logical side or the theological studies, there's a risk of like getting deviated into something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because ideas build on ideas build on ideas, so like somewhere you could easily get led astray. And then when you look at it from like a creative song whatever, there's a risk of you sort of confuse what you're praising, like the actual idea
Of
of God,
course.
and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's so easy to make it about yourself or about something else altogether. So again, going back to your thing of like, no matter which path you choose,
Mm-hmm.
there's always pitfalls.